Bienvenidos a Tres Respuestas, un espacio de discusión, de debate y de propuestas. Nuestro invitado de hoy es Michael Oren, escritor, ensayista, novelista, diplomático, político y una de las figuras más importantes de la política de Israel. Se desempeñó también como embajador de Israel en los Estados Unidos y es una de las voces más autorizadas a nivel mundial sobre no solamente el conflicto histórico árabe-israelí, sino sobre la construcción de la paz. Michael, it's such a pleasure to have you in Tres Respuestas, but also more importantly to have you in Colombia.
It's delightful to be with you. It's a great honor to be with you, and it's always terrific to be in Colombia. It's not my first time here. I'm always delighted to be back.
Well, not only that, but your beloved one is a Colombian, so we feel very honored that you have that part of your heart already captured by a Colombian. Huh?
Very much. How could I not? How could I not? How could I not? So delightful. And here at a very challenging time for relations between Colombia and Israel, very disturbing times, and also for Israel as we're sitting here. We're listening to my watch go ping, 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 because my watch is attached to an alert that tells me when rockets are firing or landing in Israel. And even while we've been sitting talking, we've had rockets being fallen.
You were showing me that, and it's shocking. But also, I want to start with something. You just gave me this book, that is called The Rejuvenated State, Israel 2048. So in 2048, Israel will be celebrating 100 years of existence. And I want to start with that. Your assessment of how challenging it has been for Israel to be facing so many existential challenges on a permanent basis, and how should we foresee the future of the state of Israel? I want to start with that.
Okay, so good, delightful. 2048 is a book that came out last year, before the war. It was written a year before that. It grew out of a conversation I had with the Prime Minister, with Netanyahu, one day, how we together lamented that Israelis don't think enough about our future. We were always so bogged down in current crises. Little did we know what a current crisis would look like. And then I took upon myself to begin to think about the future. The book is not really a book, it's like a manifesto. It's in Arabic, Hebrew, and in English in one volume. In English, it's about 80 pages. We'd like to get it translated into Spanish. 22 chapters that deal with every aspect of Israeli society. It's social policy, education, health, foreign policy, Palestinians, Israeli Arabs, Israel and the Jewish communities around the world, the diaspora. It's all there, and defense. The longest chapter is about the peace process, because I've been involved in the peace process now for close to 30 years. I was an advisor to Yitzhak Rabin, going way back, and I participated in the last round of negotiations with the Palestinians. So a lot of information there. And I determined in writing this book that I would not pull punches. I would be as candid as possible in dealing with Israel's problems and suggesting ways that they can be resolved. And you'd be surprised, the biggest problems in Israel are not Hamas and Hezbollah, or even Iran. The biggest problems in Israel are internal. And I bet you probably say the same thing about Colombia. So the biggest problems we have to do with enforcing the law. Large parts of Israel, basically there's no law, all right, almost like anarchy in the south and the Negev. Parts of our populations that are sort of outside the framework of Israeli sovereignty, the ultra-Orthodox Jews, not serving in the army, not very much participating in the economy, not educating their children so they can someday be part of the economy. These are issues that threaten the future, not just the welfare, the future survival of the state of Israel. And controversial. The goal of the book was to engage people in dialogue, actually to get people angry if I could. And it's certainly done that in many ways. So where are we now in terms of 2048? How can we assure that the next century after 2048, the 348, will be a successful, prosperous century? Because on one hand, you could look at the Israel story, and it's one of probably the most successful story you could imagine of any country. It's a country that starts with nothing. I mean, really nothing. No natural assets, no resources, no allies, 600,000 Jews that are about to be attacked by Arab armies and then go from war to war to war to war, and how this country turns around and its population grows tenfold. It becomes one of the most technologically advanced nations in the world. It is an army that's more than twice as large as the British and French armies combined, right? 7 of the world's leading universities, a universal healthcare system, water that comes out of your tap that's better than anything you get in the bottle, kind of thing. Great food, great nightlife, security. We have almost no violent crime. We certainly have terrorism, no violent crime. All of these things, plus a democracy in an area that's not very hospitable to democracy, as you know, and one of the few countries in the world that has never known a second of non-democratic governance. Not a second. And we're the only country on that list that's never known a second of peace, so it's quite an accomplishment for this country. Reviving the Hebrew language, all these things Israel's done, and yet, you look at Israel today, increasingly isolated in the world, criticized. Our relationship with Colombia is in a very bad place. Criticized by the world for what they claim is reacting or over the top, killing too many Palestinians in Gaza, the settlement issue, religious issues relating to Jerusalem, prayer on the Temple Mount, so many flashpoints. And then internal dissent within Israel itself, the protest against the government's attempt to reform the judicial system. Now protests against the government's position on the hostage negotiations. I live in South Tel Aviv, and any given day I can't get to work or I can't get to an airport because of protests going about. So it is a very mixed bag of where we are today, where we've been and where we are. I'm an optimistic person by nature, I'm sure you are too, and looking back at not just at Israel's history, but at Jewish history, over 4,000 years, how we really shouldn't be here. And we keep on coming back. We are extremely resilient and resourceful people. And even in my lifetime, living in Israel, I've seen 1 million Jews from the former Soviet Union come to the country, 100,000 Ethiopian Jews being airlifted into the country. And I've seen us come from a place where we were truly isolated. We didn't have relations with China. We didn't have relations with India. We didn't have relations with Africa. Today, a different place. We had a nice relationship with the United States, but not a strategic alliance with the United States. We didn't have peace with Egypt. We didn't have peace with Jordan. We didn't have the Abraham Accords. So if you look at my own history and sort of the long view of history, I think that would argue in favor of optimism rather than pessimism.
And let me then ask you something, Michael. I mean, you have described that in your lifetime, you have lived different moments of war,
yes,
moments of threat. But you have also experienced in your lifetime having the possibility of being an architect of peace. You participated in the Oslo negotiations. You've been trying to build the elements of a two-state solution. And that's my second question. Do you think, looking from now to 2048, you think there could be a stable two-state solution by the 100th century of the State of Israel?
Unlikely. I say that not with any joy. Unlikely. I've also been involved in peace. I've also been a soldier for many years.
Yes.
Just about a week and a half ago, I was serving up on the northern border. My children have all been in the army. They've been in war. I have a son who was wounded in war. We've had a close family member killed in a terrorist attack. We've all been through it all, both the war part and the peace process part. The two-state solution has become sort of almost a doctrine of faith in the world. And people don't ever ask, what does this Palestinian state look like? Who's going to run the state? Is it going to be a peaceful state? Is it going to be a state that is actually going to say, once there's a state, there's no more claims and no more negotiations? Is it a state that's actually going to recognize the existence of a Jewish people that enjoys a right of self-determination in our homeland? We recognize that about the Palestinians, but it's never been reciprocated, that recognition. So I see tremendous obstacles. Right now, my own family is probably left of center, and you suggest a two-state solution to you, and they say you're crazy, you're nuts. 70% of the Palestinians in the West Bank support Hamas. 80% more think October 7th was a good idea. And so, I live in Jaffa in southern Tel Aviv. I look out my back window and I see the West Bank. So if there's a Palestinian state over there that's going to be run by Hamas, I'm not going to be in rocket range, I'm going to be in rifle range. So no one's willing to take that risk. But just the last thought, that focusing always on this two-state solution, which is extremely difficult. And now, of course, within Israel itself, the opposition, we close off the possibility about talking about other venues. A federal solution, a cantonment solution on the basis of Switzerland, expanded autonomy. And if you're fixing all the time on an end game that can't be reached, you're not taking other paths which maybe could be reached. And I think that's a tragedy.
So you just mentioned two very interesting things. You said federal possibilities, the canton system of Switzerland. If you were to think of what would be an ideal mechanism to stabilize, build lasting peace, which also implies not having Hamas, because we have seen for many decades that the basic aim of Hamas is to destroy not only the Jewish state, but to kill any form of Jewish life in the region.
Indeed.
So that makes things very complex. But I want to maybe connect two things. How can there be a solution that could be built based on this experience that you just shared, but also how can we really, from the international community standpoint, get rid of the threat of Hamas? And that is also connected to something that I am worried. Don't you think that since 2006, 2007, when Hamas literally took over government in the Gaza Strip, why had there been so much indifference from the international community that allowed Hamas to become such a major threat for the existence of Israel?
I would also say there was indifference on the part of Israel at first, too. There were some Israelis, you're not looking at one, but some Israelis who thought that Hamas would be a good counterweight to the PLO and didn't crack down on Hamas. They lived to regret that, certainly. We have to cease looking at Hamas as distinct from other jihadist groups in the Middle East. Whether it's Al-Qaeda, ISIS, even Hezbollah, even though it's a Shiite group, they share a common theology. It's not even an ideology. They seek to recreate the medieval caliphate. First in the Middle East, and then that caliphate will expand its border to encompass the globe. They're a global organization. Their aspirations are for the entire planet Earth, not just for the Middle East. It starts in the Middle East. And for Hamas, it's distinct only in that it's in its sequence in reaching that global caliphate. The first step is destroying the state of Israel and replacing it not with a Palestinian state, but with an Islamic state. They're different. Or it's a Palestinian Islamic state, but certainly not a secular state, not a democratic state. So understand that. Now, it's now become sort of almost cliche to say you can destroy Hamas, the organization, but you can't destroy Hamas, the idea. I think that's tautological. Obviously, you can't destroy an idea. It's very difficult. But we know that if there's no state behind the idea is less threatening. So, for example, there are many neo-Nazis in the world today, but they're a lot less powerful because there's no Nazi Germany behind them. ISIS is still capable of carrying out terrorist attacks. It carried out a big one in Moscow not too long ago. But the fact that there's no caliphate behind it, remember, they had an Islamic state, they're less threatening than they were. So I think Israel's goal is not to eliminate the idea of Hamas. There's going to be Hamas, both in Gaza and the West Bank, and maybe even abroad. And Hamas has been branching out. But they'll be less effective if they don't have a state behind them. To truly eradicate the idea, and now we're talking about ideas that spread across the Middle East, across the Muslim world, into South America, as you know.
Yeah.
It requires education. And to their credit, the Saudis have begun to embark on this. They've been changing their textbooks to accept other religions, to be tolerant. And that's very different than the notion that if you don't accept this brand of Islam, you're going to die. And we know that the atrocities of October 7th were the result of an education system. And from the earliest age, these Palestinians were taught that to kill, maim, behead, rape, burn Jews was the best thing they could do. Nothing to do. I was in Knesset for years.
Yep.
And in Knesset, I chaired a classified committee on foreign relations. We dealt with very sensitive issues. And among the issues we dealt with was the Palestinian Authority education system, not the Hamas education system. And I've been through a lot. I've been through wars. I've seen it all. I used to come out of these meetings sick to my stomach. Because in the Palestinian Authority, they were teaching kids not just the benefits of slitting an Israeli throat, but actually where to stick the knife. I'm not kidding, just where to stick that knife in order to kill. That's what they're teaching their children. So you want the idea to die, you have to start re-educating the youth. And that's going to take a long time, and it's going to take recognition of the problem and action to rectify the problem.
But you mentioned possibilities. I mean, you mentioned maybe a federal state.
Mm-hmm.
You said the canton system.
I love the canton system. I love the Swiss.
How would you think practically that could work? I mean, give us a practical
it's interesting.
example.
The original UN partition resolution from November 1947 talked about an economic union, that the two states, the Arab state and the Jewish state, would be linked economically. Basically, we're linked economically now.
Of course.
Well, before the war, not now, but about 170,000 Palestinians from the West Bank would come into Israel every day to work. We were working together. I live in a mixed city. I live in Jaffa. We live with Arabs and Jews together, pretty much without tensions. So it's possible. It's possible. So a cantonment system would say, okay, there'd be a canton of Hebron, or a canton of Nablus. Okay, then that canton would be linked with a canton in Galilee and a canton in Jerusalem. And we'd have type of that federal Swiss model where we'd be linked by an economic union. We'd have we'd have coordination on trade policies. We'd have coordination on security policies. And every area would feel that they could exist autonomously. And I think that would be very good. We'd still have a Jewish state, but we'd have different cantonments there, like you have a Swiss state. And it could be explored, and you could adapt it to our reality. We don't have to take the Swiss reality, entirely, but it's thinking out of the box. And I think we have to think out of the box, because that box of the two-state solution has been around now for 30 years. We keep on trying to do the same thing and keep on failing. During my last year as ambassador, I accompanied then Secretary of State John Kerry, who went back and forth for 2 years and got nowhere. And I think we should begin to say, if you're hitting your head against the same wall, maybe it's time to change the wall.
Michael, let me move to another sad subject. October 7th. It was a dantesque, brutal, bloody, miserable terrorist attack on Israeli soil. The things we saw were absolutely insane. And from my own analysis, I think Hamas had a series of purposes to hurt the Israeli soul, hurt its people, but also to put in danger the trust of the state of Israel, expecting a massive retaliation, also with the expectation that a retaliation would demolish what had been built with the Abraham Accords, that Israel would be isolated by the international community, and also that any possibility of building a lasting relationship based on common trade and other things with Saudi Arabia will also fall down. Indeed. So today we have seen that many of those things did not occur. The tragedy occurred, the retaliation occurred, but how do you think, what's your assessment of what happened? How would you describe the challenge of what happened to people that are listening to us, but also how are we going to come out of this tragedy and try to stabilize the region again?
It's about 6 or 7 questions. Let's see if I can put them in some kind of order. Understanding the universe of Hamas is very difficult for us. Okay? Yes, Hamas wanted to hurt our soul. I think you're absolutely right, and it was a wonderful way of putting it. It wanted to cast out into the sanctity and effectiveness of the state of Israel, its ability to defend its citizens and its actual territory. But they wanted to do much more than that. I think the people who crossed that border, the terrorists who crossed the border on October 7th, actually thought they were going to destroy the state of Israel. That we know from the literature they carried on them. They carried maps all the way to Jerusalem. They also carried GoPro cameras on them that recorded their atrocities, something the Nazis never did. Nazis understood that what they were doing wouldn't be acceptable even to the most virulent anti-Semites back in Berlin, so they kept it secret. Well, these guys were broadcasting what they did to the entire Muslim world because they thought that would bring them prestige. And in fact, it has. The numbers of the statistics show the support for Hamas has skyrocketed after that. So that's saying something about the nature of that world and how it works. So there are many different objectives there. And then there's the scenario that I think you were getting at, is that in drawing us into this combat in Gaza, in the densely populated, densely built up, very confined area of Gaza, where Israel is not only fighting an enemy that is hiding behind the civilian population, it's hiding under the civilian population in 400 miles of tunnels, where no army in history has ever encountered anything remotely like this. Nothing, not the United States in Fallujah, in Mosul, nothing like it. And Hamas has a strategy, which is very brilliant, and we don't have an answer for it, I'll tell you right now. I've been trying to for many years, which is they get credit for killing our civilians, and then they get credit when we kill their civilians, no matter how hard we try to avert that, to avoid killing civilians, because they're hiding in the mosques, they're hiding in the schools, they're hiding in the hospitals. We know this. They want. The head of Hamas, Sinwar, has said it's great that our civilians die, because what does that do? It makes us look terrible in the press, puts tremendous pressures on governments, and governments respond by saying, okay, let's have a permanent ceasefire. Let's put the end to the war. Everyone's saying let's have an end to the war. Well, what does an end to the war mean? It means Hamas comes out of the tunnels. It goes like this, right? They love doing that. And then they reconquer the Gaza Strip. They rearm, and they stage the next October 7th, because that's what they said they're going to do. Their leaders said they're willing to do it 10,000 times until Israel is destroyed. It's brilliant on the part of Hamas. They get away with it. And so that's cost us immensely. It's cost us immensely in our foreign relations, our relations with Colombia. Our best friend in South America no longer has relations with us. It's excruciating, excruciating. Waves of anti-Semitism throughout the world, anti-Israel, pro-Hamas demonstrations on America's leading universities. All of this is nightmarish for the state of Israel. And by the way, the war's not over. We're still fighting, and now we're fighting on multiple fronts. We're fighting in the north, where I was, where 100,000 Israelis have been displaced, uprooted from their homes. Dozens have died. Rockets falling, even as we're sitting here. Attack from Iran, attack from all of Iran's proxies, the Iraqi, the Syrians, the Houthis. Everyone's attacking us. Who would have imagined this? When we met in Jerusalem last time, it seems like a different universe we belong to, a different dimension. All Israelis say this. There was October 6th, and there was October 7th. They're two very, very different worlds. Right now, the hope is to get an agreement on the hostage release that meets Israel's requirements, that doesn't allow a deal that will free the maximum number of hostages while not allowing Hamas to emerge from those tunnels and reclaim control over Gaza and mount the next attack. That's what we're trying to do. And in the north, try to get Hezbollah away from the fence, because Israelis won't come back to their communities if Hezbollah is still along that fence.
Michael, I was in Israel as we had dinner in Jerusalem. We had conversations with leaders from parliament. I had the possibility to meet people from the IDF. It was a tremendous experience for me. But I also praised at the time all the evolution of the Abraham Accords. I just want to ask you something, because you have mentioned about relationships between Israel and Colombia. After October 7th, it was very sad to see the president of Colombia in some sort of way siding with Hamas, not condemning the attack, but also then breaking relationships with Israel, something that has not even happened with countries in the Middle East, which is almost insane just to think. What do you think this decision by the Colombian government meant structurally in such a historical, lasting, positive relationship between Israel and Colombia?
First of all, it's tragic. And I want to say that I've been involved, I had the honor to be involved in the making of the Abraham Accords. And we achieved those accords for many reasons, but the biggest reason is because Israel is strong. Middle Eastern states are facing twin existential threats. They face a threat from Shiite extremism, Iran, Hezbollah, and Sunni extremism, Hamas, ISIS, the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda. They're caught between the two. There's one country in the Middle East that's standing up to both of them, that's us. And if we're strong, we will continue to expand these peace agreements, get other countries to join. And I'm gonna, the spirit of John Lennon's gonna hate this, but we have to give war a chance. Just do. That, if we win this war against both Hezbollah and Hamas, we show that we're strong, we'll get more peace, not less peace. That's why they haven't broken up relations with us. Right? Colombia, on the other hand, has broken off a relationship, and it's so painful because this was our closest relationship in South America. A deep friendship that, as you know, has many dimensions to it. It's strategic, it's defensive, it's commercial and economic.
Technological.
It's everything. It's everything. And personal relationship with the Jewish community here, with Colombians living in Israel, like my much better half. So close. Every Israeli, when they're serving in the army, dreams of coming to Colombia. That's their dream. The first place we're going to is Colombia. And this country's reputation in my country could not be higher. Everyone loves Colombia. So it's very painful and unnecessary. And I was recently talking to an interview with La Semana, and they asked me to give a message to the president. And this was my message, if I can, and that is, you can have criticism of Israel. We're used to criticism. We criticize ourselves, God knows, enough. You can have criticism the way we're conducting this war. We have criticism the way we're conducting the war. We're open to that type of dialogue. But once you shut off the dialogue, not only are you causing harm to both countries, particularly, I think, to Colombia, you're causing harm. What good has it given you? And in fact, you're hurting the Palestinians. Because if you get a Palestinian to talk to you honestly, the Palestinians are going to say, we want relations between Israel and Colombia because that way we can have the dialogue. And the only way we're going to move forward toward peace is by having open dialogue, not by not talking, obviously. I think I'm saying something very obvious. And I would urge him to rescind that order.
Well, I mean, we were all shocked, but we were primarily shocked because he never condemned the October 7th attack. And then, breaking the relationships, not allowing Colombia even to be there as part of the international community in peace building is also
how does that serve anybody's interest? I don't get it. Anybody's interest. What?
But let me also move to another subject that we have seen after the October 7th attacks, and is the rise of anti-Semitism in many places of the world, in U.S. universities, which in some big way have been influenced by post-truth, by manipulation of information, manipulation of history. How can there be an effective defeat of that horrible anti-Semitic narrative that is now being built massively through all these channels of disinformation?
Well, before the podcast, we were talking about Churchill. And I think you can fight anti-Semitism in a Churchillian way. You can fight it in the classroom, you can fight it in the courtroom, you can fight it in the media, you can fight it in the legislature, you can fight it in many different ways. The fact is, anti-Semitism is the world's oldest hatred. It is the most deep-seated and multifaceted hatred because Jews get to be hated by the left and the right, which is completely unique. And anti-Semitism, classic anti-Semitism is the Jew is always the worst thing that a society can imagine. So if you're a capitalist society, the Jews are communists. If you're a communist society, Jews are capitalists. If you're an internationalist, Jews are patriot nationalists. If you're a nationalist, they're internationalists. It's always going to be like this. Right now, we are the worst thing that can be because we're white colonial settler races. That's the worst thing you can be right now, according to the anti-Semites. Now, I think that the majority, I'm going to take a step out. The majority of those kids out in American campuses who are calling to basically eradicate the state of Israel in support of Hamas, if you ask them whether they're anti-Semitic, they'll say, no, I'm not anti-Semitic. Are you kidding? Some of my best friends, some of the people even protesting me are Jewish. What they don't understand is that the protests themselves are fundamentally and essentially anti-Semitic. Not just because of what they say, but the fact that they're taking place. Nobody's out at Columbia University protesting the Russian invasion of Ukraine. No one's out in Columbia's campus and protesting the fact that China has put 1 million Muslims in concentration camps. Nobody cares. Or that hundreds of thousands of Africans have died in the civil war in the Sudan. Nobody cares. They didn't care about Syria either. They're singling out Israel. And that, by definition, and by the definition of the IRA agency, the International Holocaust Remembrance Agency, is anti-Semitic. And they're probably maybe not even aware of that. I think what's happened is this, and this is going to be controversial, so brace yourself. I grew up in a tough working class neighborhood, a Sicilian neighborhood, and I was called the Christ killer pretty much every day by people in my neighborhood. But most American Jews didn't grow up like that, and I know from my context with the Colombian Jewish community, they didn't grow up around anti-Semitism. Maybe a remark here and there. It was really the aberration. Because after the Holocaust, anti-Semitism became very politically incorrect, unsavory. And now we've moved, 80 years beyond the Holocaust. It's being forgotten. And we're reverting to a type of old normal. So the anti-Semitism you see today may seem aberrant to many Jews in the world, but to my great-grandparents who would say, hey, this is perfectly normal. And their grandparents would have said the same thing. Oh, this is perfectly normal. The world hates Jews. It's what we've been about for 2,000 years. So in a way, the world is kind of reverting to form. The difference is today the Jews can fight back. They couldn't do that when they were living in the Pale of Settlement in Europe. Couldn't fight back. And today we have the State of Israel. And the State of Israel exists to defend Jews. We didn't do a very good job on October 7th. We're doing a better job now. And I think that's a huge difference, a huge, huge difference.
Michael, now that you mentioned this, one of the good elements of Israel diplomacy in the world has been entrepreneurship, innovation, technology. Many people have been touched by looking at the example of a country that became a technological superpower. Many young people around the world were looking at the example of the startup nation, and I think it was a very important, positive, diplomatic way to touch hearts and minds and people to learn from the Israeli experience of having to deal with scarcity and then being able to create an economy and all these things that really make Israel an exemplary state. Today, how can we move that sentiment of the startup nation? How can we talk more about the chutzpah as this spirit of constant challenge and innovation so that we don't lose that positive diplomacy that was making such a big effort around the world?
Well, one way is by showing people the way Israel has improved their lives, and in many cases saved their lives. There's a cartoon circulating on the internet. It shows a man lying in a hospital bed, and he's wearing sort of, Palestinian pin, and the doctor comes up to him and says, I got some bad news for you. You want to boycott Israel, but you're not going to be able to get this operation, you're not going to be able to use your cell phone, you're not going to be able to use your computer, because Israel components are each and every one of them. And you're not going to be able to have clean water because Israel is the world leader in water reclamation. We reclaim 90% of our water. The country after us is Spain with 20% of the water. That's how far ahead we are. And in Israel, the water that comes out of the tap in your bathroom is better than the water you're going to get in a bottle. That's that kind of thing. And now we're working on technologies that will clean up the atmosphere from carbon. Huge technologies, and certainly biomedical field. And they come to me, not that I understand any of this stuff, you understand, they come to me because I understand the markets. So in convincing people the way Israel is in your lives, in every part of your lives, and always in a better way. Always making your lives better, extending longevity, health, and the quality of life on Earth. The other is financial. I'm going to go back to my personal history. I told you I've been in several wars. One war I was in was the 1991 Gulf War, where we were being pounded by Scud rockets from Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And I remember sitting in my uniform in a bomb shelter in Tel Aviv while these Scuds are falling, boom, 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 and thinking to myself, why can't Israel be like Kuwait? So if you remember, the international coalition went in to liberate Kuwait from Iraqi occupation. Kuwait is not exactly a bastion of democracy, right? Why do they go into Kuwait? Oil. Oil, oil, oil. The world had a financial interest in preserving Kuwaiti independence. I want the world to have a financial interest in preserving Israeli security. So I had a dream back then in 1991 that someday the world would be so invested in Israeli technology that they wouldn't let us be threatened in any way. We're getting there. We're not quite there yet, but that's my dream.
Let me talk about Iran, because I want to connect what you just said with the permanent threat of Iran.
Yes.
You gave me some figures when we were talking informally about how big the threat is for Israel. Why don't you describe to the people that are listening to us the size, the magnitude of the threat, not only from Iran, but also from Hezbollah, in terms of the thousands of rockets and missiles, and how using all the shields, all the technologies that are today at the hand of the Israeli government and the support from the United States, even using them at full capacity, still the threat, it's very much existential.
Well, this is just numbers here. Iran has thousands of rockets, many thousands of rockets. They're long range, and they're huge rockets. 500 kilograms of TNT that will take down this whole building, one rocket. Take down a neighborhood, kill thousands. Hezbollah has as many as 170,000 rockets and missiles. They are long range, they're very accurate and heavy rockets. Countless drones, armed drones that carry bombs, they kill people. There are rockets and drones in the hands of the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq and Syria, and of course, rockets and drones in the hands of the Houthi rebels in Yemen, who are backed by Iran as well. Up the street from me in Tel Aviv, a couple of weeks ago, a man was killed by a drone attack on Tel Aviv sent by Yemeni rebels backed by Iran. Okay, so in a war situation, Hezbollah itself is capable of firing as many as 6,000 rockets a day at us. Then you add all these other rockets, and you're talking about a strategic threat, an existential threat to the state of Israel, because they can target our essential utilities, our airfields, our army bases, Dimona. They can target anything. And while Israel has by far the most advanced multi-layered anti-missile technologies in the world, its Iron Dome, which is the low level, David Sling, Arrow 2, Arrow 3, goes up to space. We can take out rockets in space with Arrow 3. And then with the American systems, Americans have moved naval assets to the Middle East. They have systems, the THAAD system, the Aegis and Patriot systems, all of that. There's going to be a number of these rockets going to get through. There's no shield. In any case, Iron Dome itself is only 92% effective, which means that you fire 100 rockets at us, 8 are going to get into there. And if these rockets are huge, that's a whole big different situation. So unlike Hamas, which posed a tactical threat to the state of Israel, with all the horrors they perpetrated, they couldn't destroy us. Hezbollah, Iran, it's a whole different magnitude.
And how can that be prevented today?
Well,
I mean, what should the international community do today to effectively prevent something nasty to occur?
Well, my answer is going to shock you. So far, the disposition of the international community, in particular the United States, has been in order to de-escalate, you have to de-escalate. And nobody seems to understand that to de-escalate against Iran, you have to escalate against Iran. So, for example, Iran has not only fired all these rockets and drones at Israel. Remember, Iran is the primary backer of Hamas. But pro-Iranian forces have fired at American bases, American service people, almost 200 times since October 7th. Including last week, they injured 6 American soldiers. They fired at international shipping through the Mandeb Straits, which is one of the major maritime channels for commerce. They, above all, are this far away, a decision away from getting a nuclear weapon. And once Iran gets a nuclear weapon, that changes the balance of power, not just in the Middle East, but globally. Iran is allied with China. It's supplying drones and missiles to kill Ukrainians, to kill Europeans. It all comes back to Iran, Iran, Iran. But there's one problem. Nobody has ever exacted a price from Iran. With all of this aggression, no one has fired a single bullet at Iran. Now, if you're an Iranian leader, you say to yourself, hey, I'm getting away with this. Why can't I keep doing this? They never have to pay a price. Until Iran is made to pay a price, a painful price, a prohibitive price, none of this will stop. I guarantee you, it'll just keep going on. On April 14th, when Iran fired those 350 rockets and missiles at us and drones, the United States helped us take down those. About 4 got through. And President Biden said to Prime Minister Netanyahu, well, take the win, don't respond. It's a strange way of looking at it. Stopping a barrage of missiles is not a win. It's not a lose, is what it is. It's a non-lose. If you played football, you know that you don't win the game just on defense, by blocking a kick at the goal, right? You win by going on the offense. And so as long as Iran thinks it's going to get away with it, and it's getting away with it, nothing will stop. Now, the United States has moved massive assets into the Middle East. For the United States, which, by the way, has abilities that we don't have strategic bombers. The United States have. The United States has Tomahawk missiles on top of aircraft carriers. The last time I looked, we don't have an aircraft carrier. The United States could deal with all this in a single night, and not lose a single soldier, because the United States bombers can bomb at a height that no Iranian anti-aircraft could ever reach. Really. They are completely invulnerable. We dealt with in a single night, and I think the Iranians would get the message. They get the message that they're not going to get away with it anymore, and you would contribute massively, massively to stability in the Middle East, and you'd send an unequivocal message to Russia and to China that the United States is back and don't mess with us. Now, will the Biden administration do this? I don't know.
And since we're getting to the end of this conversation,
we should just keep going.
yeah, I could spend the whole day
all
and
day.
enjoying the conversation with you, Michael. I want to talk about interlocutors from the Palestinian Authority. I mean, you've been in multiple negotiations, you've met a lot of people, and one of the questions that I always ask to myself is, who are going to be the new generation of leaders inside the Palestinian Authority that can have empathy, that can really build bridges? Because sometimes I tend to believe that we're getting out of this group of people that wanted to build peace at any cost, even their political cost. Are you optimistic that there can be a new generation of leaders inside the Palestinian Authority that can help craft a peaceful solution? Have you met some of those leaders? Would you mention some of them that you believe will be instrumental to stabilize the region and trying to find a structural solution?
I'm realistic. I'm not pessimistic or optimistic. I'm realistic. Remember, this generation of Palestinians are coming out of that education system. For many of them, their encounter with Israelis are either with Israeli soldiers or Israeli settlers, and I understand that. That's very problematic for them. They are traumatized as Israelis are traumatized. And so it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be, it's not going to happen overnight. Everyone seems to think you can say, oh, two-state solution, and somehow this idea with journalists and brief journalists who think that the Israel-Palestinian conflict began on October 7th. This conflict's been going on 120 years, with many massacres, by the way.
If not centuries.
Sorry. There's the massacre of 1929, where the Palestinians massacred the Jews of Hebron. The massacre of 1948, when they massacred the Jews of the Gush Etzion settlements. The massacres, all the terrorist attacks. Everybody in Israel has lost somebody. So it doesn't happen overnight. And it's going to take a long way of reconciliation. If you think that tomorrow you can snap your fingers, it's going to be a two-state solution, you're not going to get anywhere. You've got to change the education system. You have to reopen Israel's borders to Palestinian workers, because it's very difficult now. Israelis are afraid. They're afraid after October 7th. You know, Hamas not only destroyed communities, it destroyed the basis of trust, which many Israelis had with Palestinians who worked in our communities. In my own kids' schools, we had Palestinian teachers. In kindergartens, Palestinian women wearing hijabs. No one thought twice about it until October 7th. And they began to think, is our kindergarten teacher with them or is he with us? I mean, that kind of question. It's going to take a long time. And I think we have to keep our eye on that long-range ball. How do we move toward it and not insist on a solution tomorrow? Because that's not going to happen.
And let me talk about Israeli politics for a second. Israel has a very polarized political system today.
Yes.
And many people say that in some sort of way, Hamas took advantage of the political polarization in order to structurally hit Israel the way they did. But is there any possibility to de-escalate that polarization and create more sense of unity to face these structural changes? Do you think Bibi Netanyahu is going to be that person that can survive the circumstances and keep the unity? Do you think there's going to be new leaders emerging, maybe Naftali coming back, or whom else? I mean, I just want to understand, how do you think the Israeli politics are going to be fixed in such an structural, existential challenge for Israel?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. You know, I travel around a lot in Israel, and I listen. I think it's very important, more important for diplomats to listen than to talk. And what I hear from everybody is that what we want more than anything else is unity. That we can disagree with one another, we can disagree with each other even violently, but we have to be able to sit and talk and understand that at the end of the day, we're all Israelis, we're in this state together, we face challenges of education and health and welfare that we all face. This government is not that government. This is not a unified government. This government is about division and deepening those divisions. It just is. And it's a political strategy. It's probably not just a strategy, it's who they are. It's not going to happen with this government. And while I always say it's premature to predict the demise, to eulogize Mr. Netanyahu politically, because he's always going to come back. Right now he's coming back again in the polls. Eventually there will be a new leadership. And my hope and my energies are put into ensuring that leadership will be a leadership of unity, of reconciliation, of recognizing that we're going to have differences. We're going to have religious people, we're going to have secular people, we're going to have left-wingers, right-wingers. We're going to have Jews from Eastern background, Jews from Western background. We're going to have Arabs. We're going to have Christians and Muslims and Druze and Circassians. This is a kaleidoscopic society. It is anything but uniform, anything. We're going to have black people, white people. And we have to have a government that comes out with that message that we are, at the end of the day, together. And we can live with and then in fact, our diversity is a source of energy, of strength, that diversity. We have to know how to harness it and not use it as a force for good and not a force for destruction. This is where we're going before October 7th. Very, very vicious divisions. We're coming up to the holiday of Yom Kippur, the most sacred holiday in the Jewish calendar. Last year, there were riots in Tel Aviv over the way Yom Kippur was being observed in the streets of Tel Aviv. I can't think of anything more painful. Jews beating up one another over the way they observed Yom Kippur. That has got to end. That has got to end. There has to be a leadership that leads us in putting an end to it.
Michael, it has been a pleasure to have this conversation with you. It is a pleasure to have you in Colombia. And as a Colombian, I feel very happy that your heart is captured by an amazing Colombian woman.
Yes.
And I hope you enjoyed your stay in our country. And thank you for your insights. And thank you for all you have contributed to peace, to help people understand the challenges of finding stability in the Middle East. But also, more importantly, thank you for being such an important player in the historical relationships between Colombia and Israel. Gracias por estar en Tres Respuestas.
Viva Colombia, I'm Yisrael Chai. Thank you, I'm deeply honored. Thank you, I'm blushing. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Right.